But the way they were able to shut him down and make the game really all about you and maybe Clearlove trying to find the right fights is exactly what White wanted to do.
EDG didn't get much out of the early game, but a lot of wards swept, and we saw how far behind Clearlove was throughout the game, and then trying to initiate, and it was very off with him and Koro. One would try to get back out, and Koro would be the guy diving in, and it just didn't seem to work out in the fights the way they wanted.
And something that none of us really expected coming into this match was the simple fact that Rumble was played in the top lane by Lupa. That caught all of us off guard with our stats.
Yeah, right off the bat, they've been preparing to, obviously. Samsung White wants to win this group.
Absolutely. So right now, we're actually going to throw it over to the guys at the analyst desk for a breakdown on Samsung White's win.
Thank you very much, guys. And right at the end of the conversation, they're bringing up the picks and bans. Lupa playing Rumble, seeing the Zillion, seeing the Nami coming out. Samsung White surprising us a little bit in picks and bans, but they made it work at the end of the game. Monty, what's your take?
Well, Rumble was a pick that we saw late in the regionals in Korea from SK Telecom, and it was a game that they beat Najin White Shield with in the finals. And coming into these picks and bans, we really are looking at two very quintessential team compositions for both of these teams. We've got that hyper tank up in the top lane for EDG, that emphasis on AoE and team fighting with the Jarvan in the jungle, and then on the other side of the coin, we have actually an extremely difficult composition to play from Samsung White, because we're dealing with a comp that requires a massive early game lead. Rumble's the champion that you have a lot of early dragon control over, and EDG played well against it. In fact, they kind of baited them into the pit and then rushed mid lane, taking towers, avoiding the Rumble ult whenever possible in the early game. Fortunately, there was a bad fight in the jungle right there. But going into the late game, if you have this composition that we see Samsung White running, you need that large lead. You need that big buffer. And not only that, but you need pretty much perfect team fighting because you're very squishy. You're super reliant on the Zillion pick to get the ult off in order to get the resets rolling with Tristana and Kha'Zix. So requires good Zhonya's use from the Rumble as well. And of course, you know, if we look at the pick and ban phase, early Zillion pick, it's a flex pick, although typically White plays it in mid, and then they have that counter pick on support with the Nami.
Especially given how the pick and ban phase was going, it was pretty telegraphed that Zillion was going to end up going mid lane because they have the Rumble that they definitely want to match against Maokai. But then Zillion Tristana could absolutely just lose against Lucian Thresh, so they needed Nami as a kind of pick support, and it worked for them. But
didn't you feel that Tristana Nami should also lose to Lucian Thresh? What was your take on the head-to-head matchup and how that played out?
Yeah, that's something I really want to point out. How EDG started basically at their bot lane side with their jungler, which set their bot lane even farther behind. So they had to leash, and then they played against Imp and Mata, who didn't leash with Tristana and Nami. What ended up happening was the early levels are so crucial in this matchup. They allowed Tristana to just push early and sustain up and just whittle them down, as well as Thresh started with a ward and 2 potions. So every single point of that matchup where Thresh and Lucian could just abuse Nami Tristana was just not allowed to by EDG. And at the same time, those weird jungle starts influence the jungle as well.
And you speak about the bot lane matchup. The matchup of Kha'Zix versus Jarvan with the Zillion passive makes it even more volatile. And we saw Jarvan struggle to get early ganks, and he fell behind in farm, while Kha'Zix was able to pick up some of the scraps from the mid lane. He built up a CS lead and then eventually managed to camp top lane. In another volatile matchup, when you have Rumble, a champion that if he gets really far ahead of whatever opponent he's against, he's going to be able to do just massive amounts of damage. And these champions are so reliant in their team comp that when you get them really far ahead and shut down the main tank for EDG, then the team fights has become that much easier.
I want to get back to that bottom lane point, though, Carpo was talking about a little bit, because even though they did start out with the ward, they started out with the leash, by the 3rd or 4th wave, we were equal CS. And I know you're talking about the fact that Lucian should be ahead in CS, and it should be a winning matchup, not an equal one. But the point is, we got to a point where the matchup was at least equal, which is reasonable.
But it's too late.
If not,
it's
sure, but
purely opportunity cost. You should already be so far ahead in that match.
I know what you're talking about being ahead. What I'm going to talk about, though, is the fact that they had an equal lane, and I talked about it in the previous show. What if Name chokes internationally? Name died in 2v2s in a winning lane matchup multiple times, and that is very unforgivable for EDG.
I don't think these lanes are equal, though. You got Zillion passive. Like that, it makes a huge... You're always going to not get level 2 first. Level 3
I like that point. Let's move on. 1 second. I like the point. Also, Mata was a massive reason for that when he picked up the first kill. Let's move on out of the laning phase. Strategically, Samsung White just seemed to have a step ahead of EDG despite some misplays in team fights. Freak, explain one of the strategic plays that you particularly liked.
Okay, so let's pull up the replay, and we're going to start it with it pause for a little bit. This is basically one of the big reasons Samsung White is a better team than Edward Gaming. So what you see right here is the fact that Name has a free road to split push the bottom lane. Now, we had seen Imp do this with impunity later on and get down to an inhibitor turret. There's enough wards to see Dandy if you watch that minimap. Name can split push here completely safely. Instead, he's going to give this up. Samsung White dictates and goes mid lane, and Edward Gaming the entire time is playing second fiddle and trying to play follow-up here. So roll the clip out. We're going to run it fairly fast overall just to watch the map movements, but Samsung White is actually first here. The mid laner Orianna is actually killing Wraith instead of showing up to this turret, and so this goes down for free. And this is, again, kind of silly. So finally the Lucian makes his way in, but Imp's already hitting top lane. Imp is already ready to split push the top lane, push a wave in. EDG just now sees it, just now clears the wards, and so Imp says, oh, now they're coming top lane. I can leave very easily. Is actually able to create the pressure on these turrets, and at the very end of that clip, actually what happens is you've got the Maokai trying to hold the top lane against this Tristana push, and Rumble's already getting the wave bottom. Tristana had already cleared the wave top. They've already killed the turret mid. So we actually had SSW take all 3 lanes, something useful in all 3 lanes, and Edward was like, oh shoot, go mid, oh shoot, go top, and they're just behind the entire time.
Reactionary.
And a big part of that, too, is the itemization that we saw on Tristana. If we noticed, it went BF Sword into Static Shiv so they could get as much lane pressure early. This is a team with Rumble and with this specific composition, with the disengage from Nami, that is very concerned about taking early objectives, and they don't need Infinity Edge crits. They're not looking for those early team fights. They're there to push the waves, to have the split push, and if necessary, group around the Rumble ult a turret, and just knock the turret down as fast as possible to get that global gold lead.
Let me just quickly interject and change the topic a little bit later. We've seen a big team fight following this where Samsung White delay aced Edward Gaming, got themselves a Baron. Then they sort of fiddled about for a while. A few misplays from Imp getting caught out, stalled the game out maybe a little longer than it needed to. Do we feel that Edward Gaming, if they had made slightly better decisions in the early game, maybe a different AD carrier, Cogmore, something that could scale more, could they have done better against Samsung White? Because there were some chinks in the Samsung White armor. Freak, I see you excited.
So I'm really excited about this because I looked at the post-game screen. Name had the highest damage to champions in the game. He was a 4-4-3 Lucian. We had a 9-2-7 Tristana. We had a big Rumble. Name still found a way to deal more damage than every other player in the game. So he lost, there's so many things going against him, yet he still managed to do more damage. So this is a very big factor that if EDG can get out of the early game, something they've even struggled with in China itself, let alone internationally, then they're going to look better. But it's been a repeated road of the early game going weak.
Some final thoughts from Crumbs.
I think the biggest factor was the jungle matchup. Jarvan fell so far behind, and he ended up with just a welfare build while you have Kha'Zix is going full damage. Rumble got so far ahead, and Jarvan just not able to do anything. Jarvan is all in. Either you win or you lose really hard.
Just the last point yet again about the early game. I agree with Freak. If you play around your AD carry, don't let him leash in a winning matchup, and then the other opposite side doesn't leash, and then all your advantage you literally throw away already, and you play from behind level 1. Especially when you have a tank top, just leave that tank alone. Even late game, he can just flash in and Twisted Advance, and that's enough. That's what Maokai needs to do. If your AD carry is so good at dealing damage in teamfights, then that should be enough. But why would you leash and then just screw it over in bot lane?
Big questions that Edward Gaming will need to answer. You can tell that we're particularly excited. Anyways, you guys at home, you've been sharing photos with us about how you and your friends do Worlds. So let's actually take a look at some of those very quickly. First up from @GoodVibesAU from Australia Down Under. Hype Down Under, this is how we Worlds. Definitely looking pretty cool. Like your forehead, bro. Next, should be some familiar faces from LCS fans. That's Fnatic's coach Aranea dropping in on Alliance, stealing them strats. And he says, since I saw so many World selfies, this is the Alliance selfie. Hashtag keep smiling, maybe?
Hashtag keep smiling.
Finally, we have a tweet from Jasm who says, this is how I Worlds in medical school. Let's just hope the future doctor is paying attention. I sincerely hope so, for your patient's sake. Thank you guys for sending those in. Remember to tweet your pictures to us on how you Worlds at LOL Esports. LOL Esports. Use the hashtag Worlds. And if you see big plays, world's big place. We're only just getting warmed up. After a quick break, we'll head back onto the Rift for an LCS matchup between North America's Team Solo Mid and Europe's SK Gaming. Guys, don't go anywhere. As it turns out, we're going to take a quick look at TSM preparing for their match. You can see we'll transition over to SK Gaming in a moment or two. They've got a tough challenge ahead of them playing with that substitute. Alright guys, we will be back in just a moment, so don't go anywhere. That ad break is coming up before our coverage of the 2014 World Championship continues right after this.
Just lands on towards him. The wave comes riding through along with the Aqua Prison on Nami. Taken very low. Has to back away from this one. Mana fancies it. Mana gets it.
It's going to get a miss on that one as Dandy gets himself out quickly with the flash, but the Dark Passage brings it back in range.
They're backing out. Now they're going to run back on towards him. MCZF's going to get picked off. It's a double for him. Could it be a triple? Yes, it will. That is a big turnaround, but can they have the damage back on this one? They need to get that mid laner down. Uses the ultimate on himself. He's going to pop back up in a second. Paul is still alive. That is EDG picking up 3 kills, and they're going to continue piling in.
Every summoner blown by this point. It's going to be a big shutdown there as Imp gets a kill. He goes down after in the Retribution kill. Clearlove's in all by himself, and Imp has free shots as they take down Koro.